Guys, tonight we drift into a world where time isn't kept by beeping rectangles or buzzing phones, but by the gentle plip-plop of water droplets echoing in the silence of ancient chambers. That's right. Tonight, you tumble into the quiet trickle of history, into a time when your alarm clock, well, it didn't ring, it dripped, and if you slept through it, you probably missed something important, like, I don't know, feeding a pharaoh or lighting the temple fires. You probably won't survive this kind of oversight in 1500 BCE. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I always love seeing the sleepy globe light up. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand barefoot on cool stone tiles, moonlight slanting in through the tall slits of an ancient palace wall. All is silent, except for the sound, a slow, rhythmic drip. 1, 2, 3, each drop hitting a bronze bowl, floating gently on water. The bowl tips just so. A small pebble drops from inside it, and it clinks into a lower basin. A servant wakes. A ritual begins. Somewhere, the gears of ancient society begin to turn, not from electricity or apps, but from that soft and consistent cascade of time. Welcome to the earliest known concept of the alarm clock. No snooze buttons, no Spotify wake-up playlist, just water, gravity, and the burning need to be on time for something important, like sunrise sacrifices or a king's breakfast. And while your modern brain might be scoffing at the idea, water clocks, also called clepsydras, were among the most genius feats of ancient engineering. But why water? Why not fire, sand, or the scream of a rooster on a caffeine rush? Well, imagine trying to keep time in a world with no batteries, no wires, no atomic pulses humming beneath a digital face. Water, in its dependable, measurable drip, offered something beautiful, a quiet, consistent flow, obedient to gravity, resistant to rust, and perfect for the dark stillness of early morning. You glide back even further now, through the dusty layers of civilization, and find yourself perched beside an ancient vessel in Babylon. The stars are perfectly pinned across the desert sky. Nearby, a scribe watches intently as water seeps through a tiny hole in a jar. He marks the time, not by minutes or seconds, those haven't been invented yet, but by how high the water rises or how fast it drains. This, to them, is time, fluid, unstoppable, and entirely visible. And this system, humble as it is, becomes the bedrock of something bigger. Because tracking time isn't just about waking up. It's about control, about empires staying in sync, armies attacking at dawn, and priests knowing the exact moment to begin chants to the sun god. You don't just eyeball it when it comes to divine ritual. Timekeeping is sacred. Precision is power. One mainstream historical fact often cited is that the Egyptians, clever folks that they were, used water clocks as early as 1400 BCE. Found in the Temple of Karnak, one such bowl has notches on the inside to mark the passage of hours, night hours, mind you, because they already had sundials for the day. These folks were solving the "I can't see the sun" problem long before we even invented blackout curtains. But here's your fringe tidbit for the evening. Rumor has it some of the earliest water clocks were used not by humans, but by birds. Specifically, by watching how often birds dip their beaks into bowls of water placed outside. Think of it as nature's biometric system, slightly unreliable, probably not patentable. But hey, when you're working with obsidian knives and moon calendars, you take what you can get. Now, there's debate, like most delicious historical topics, about who really made the first water alarm. Historians still argue whether the credit belongs to the Babylonians, Egyptians, or some other lost civilization whose clepsydras now sleep under the sand. Some claim the Chinese developed parallel systems entirely independently. Others believe the idea floated downstream from one culture to the next, like an idea that's just too good not to share. But here's the secret. It wasn't just about telling time. It was about triggering something. A tipping bowl that nudges a lever. A weight that drops. A float that lifts and rings a bell. Or maybe releases a toy chariot that zooms out and startles some poor soul into wakefulness. These weren't just clocks. They were events. Tiny performances, staged every night, just to get someone up on time. Thus, close your eyes for a moment and imagine it again. The deep stillness of night. A single candle flickering. A priest in linen robes dozing lightly by the wall. Suddenly, a quiet plink. Then a tiny bell chimes. No jarring sound, no vibrating mattress, just a soft metallic signal in the dark. Time to begin. And while today's alarms might jolt you into consciousness with the grace of a falling anvil, these early devices aimed for elegance, a flowing narrative of moments gently spilled into the bowl of the day ahead. Oh, and let's not forget one thing. You couldn't exactly reset these babies. If your water clock ran its course, well, you missed your chance. And since refilling and calibrating them took patience and practice, being a timekeeper was a serious gig. You didn't just get handed the bowl and told good luck. You trained. You adjusted for humidity. You made sure pebbles were the same size. It was science, art, and maybe a little superstition all rolled into one. And yes, someone probably spilled one right before sunrise and caused a mini religious panic. Don't feel bad. You've hit snooze 17 times before 7 a.m. Some things never change. You blink once and the desert winds shift. The world reshapes around you. Sand becomes sandstone. Columns rise from the ground like arms stretching for the stars. You are now in ancient Egypt, and the night smells of lotus blossoms and lamp oil. Somewhere nearby, the Nile whispers as it flows, eternal and calm, just like the liquid measuring time in a shadowed chamber beneath the temple of Amun-Ra. Inside, the air is thick with incense. A timekeeper, barefooted and serious-eyed, kneels beside a large stone basin. You watch him pull a bronze bowl from the water. It's got markings along its inner curve, like a measuring cup designed by a god. He studies the waterline and nods. It's the third hour of the night. Time to wake the assistant priest. He dips another vessel, sets it afloat, and begins again. Water in, drip out. Egyptian water clocks, or merkets, weren't just primitive tools. They were astronomical calculators in liquid form. They helped priests track decans, those neat little 10-day divisions of the Egyptian calendar, and make sense of which star was rising when. Not because astrology was trending, but because temple rituals had to align with celestial events. If you botch the timing of a solar chant, well, no big deal, unless your entire civilization believed it was literally keeping the universe from unraveling. And it wasn't just temples. Water clocks served in courts, marketplaces, and bureaucratic dens of scrolls and sandals. The Egyptian legal system, for instance, reportedly used them to limit how long someone could speak during a court case. A silent liquid hourglass that said, "Wrap it up, Senhotep. We've got 30 more plaintiffs to go before lunch." A water-powered microphone cut, if you will. Here's a mainstream historical nugget. Pharaoh Amenhotep III's reign saw the first documented use of these water clocks around 1400 BCE. Archaeologists uncovered one such artifact at Karnak. Its inside carved with scales for different seasons, because, naturally, the flow rate of water changes with temperature. Yes, ancient Egyptians understood thermal expansion before your high school physics teacher ever fumbled with a beaker. Now, let's sprinkle in a quirk. According to some sources, there may have been living alarm systems involved too. Temple cats, sacred and spoiled, were sometimes trained to respond to the gentle bell triggered by a full clepsydra. Upon hearing it, They'd meander into priestly quarters and give a not-so-subtle prod with their paw or tail. You were being woken up by divine feline decree. Good luck snoozing through that. But what really made Egypt's approach fascinating wasn't just their cleverness, it was their dedication. Timekeeping was sacred, meticulous. Every priest knew how to maintain the water clock with reverence. They adjusted for lunar cycles. They recalibrated for seasonal water density. And no, they didn't have Google to remind them to do it. You pause beside one such priest now, watching as he tilts a small copper pipe, just so, narrowing the drip. It's a silent ballet of gravity and patience. Each drop is a promise, a ceremony, a countdown not to destruction, but to continuity. And even today, historians still argue whether these water clocks were purely ritualistic or had broader applications in Egyptian civil life. Some claim they were used exclusively in religious settings, their mystery locked behind temple walls. Others believe they leaked into daily routines, helping merchants count rental time for oxen carts, or giving housewives a way to pace boiling lentils. Because let's be honest, no one wants undercooked lentils, no matter the century. As you stroll through time, you pass a row of stone pillars, each painted with scenes of gods and stars. One shows Thoth, the ibis-headed deity of wisdom, handing down what looks suspiciously like a time-measuring vessel to a mortal scribe. Maybe a blessing, maybe a warning. Here's the clock. Use it well. The message sinks in. Controlling time is divine business. And here's the irony. They weren't racing against time the way we do. You know, hurling toast into your mouth while juggling 5 apps and praying your Zoom call isn't already starting. No, they honored time, measured it, sat with it, let it drip, slowly, deliberately, predictably, and the water itself, always drawn from sacred pools, purified, sometimes perfumed. It wasn't just water, it was temporal essence. You couldn't slap any old puddle into your clepsydra and expect the gods to cooperate. It had to be ritually clean, spiritually aligned. Think less Brita filter, more divine blessing, with a splash of bureaucracy. Imagine being the guy responsible for filling the clock each evening. You couldn't be late. You couldn't mess up. If your bowl tipped too early or too late, the temple schedule was thrown off, and the high priest probably gave you that look, the one that says, "You have brought shame upon the Nile and possibly doomed us all." Again, no pressure. And just when you think this all feels delightfully old school, consider this. Egypt's water clocks influenced generations of engineers far beyond their borders. Greeks, Persians, Indians, all would borrow and build upon this early wetware of time. It was the original open source project, except instead of code, it ran on gravity and belief. You linger for one last drop, watch it fall into the lower bowl, and disappear with a whisper. You don't need flashing screens or chirping alarms, just the sound of passing time, patiently marking its way forward, one drop closer to the future. The night swells with anticipation as you drift farther in time, across the Mediterranean and into the land of the Greeks. The warm scent of olive oil and freshly baked bread fills the air. Somewhere in the distance, the first chime of a temple bell echoes off the marble columns, signaling that the gods are awake. But you're not here for their hymns. You're here for their clocks, because it's about to get a whole lot more mechanical. Enter Greek engineers, the ancient world's equivalent of your favorite tinkerer friend, who always finds a way to make something work, usually with a combination of sticks, gears, and very questionable physics. The Greeks took the water clock, already dripping with ancient wisdom, and started cranking things up a notch. They added gears, levers, and even early forms of escapements, creating more sophisticated versions of the clepsydra. These weren't just clocks anymore. They were machines that made noise, moved, and even told time with more precision. While the Egyptians had mastered the slow and steady drip, the Greeks had something a bit more active. The most famous of these innovations was invented by Ctesibius, an Alexandrian engineer, around 250 BCE. Ctesibius wasn't content with just a passive, drippy alarm. He wanted something that sounded an alarm. His water clocks didn't just keep time, they made noise. And not just any noise, but the kind of noise that would surely have made you jump out of bed and rush to temple, even if you were dreaming of olives and wine. Ctesibius's clever design included a whistle-like mechanism powered by the overflow of water, something you might recognize as the world's first automatic alarm system. Imagine waking up to the gentle hiss of water escaping a ceramic jug, followed by a shrill whistle that sliced through the morning air. It's less gentle morning breeze and more time to get moving, or else. Now here's your quirky tidbit for the night. Ctesibius didn't just stop at clocks. He was the inventor of the hydraulis, the water organ, a musical instrument powered by water pressure. So, this guy was the ultimate multitasker. Imagine being a Greek engineer who built both timepieces that screamed at you to wake up and instruments that could make your ears bleed with beautiful melodies. If anyone had a reliable wake-up call, it was the ancient Greeks. But here's where things get really interesting. These clocks weren't just about function. They became a status symbol as Greek cities began to compete for influence and glory. Having the best water clock became a sign of intellectual prowess and divine favor. Wealthy citizens in powerful cities like Athens in Alexandria would proudly display these clocks as a reflection of their advanced technology. They weren't just mechanical devices, they were statements, public works that showcase the ingenuity and sophistication of their owners. Here's a mainstream historical tidbit. By the time of the philosopher Plato, the water clock was already an essential tool in Greek life. In his laws, Plato referenced a water clock to ensure the fairness of his proposed legal system. He even specified how long an argument should last before the clock ran out. Time wasn't just a tool for the gods, but for maintaining order, even in the most mundane parts of society. When the Greeks put their minds to it, even the humble tick of a clock became a way to shape the world. As you stroll through a busy Greek marketplace, the distant sound of Ctesibius's water clock might just reach your ears. The hum of gears turning and the whistle of escaping water. You look around and notice that everyone seems to be going about their day with an unusual urgency. Maybe it's the sound of the clock echoing off the stone walls, or maybe it's just the fact that the Greeks were never the kind of people to waste time. They were philosophers, mathematicians, and engineers, but above all, they were masters of organization. And for them, time wasn't something to be taken for granted. Historians still argue whether the Greeks were the first to really innovate on water clocks, or if these designs simply spread from earlier cultures like Egypt. What we do know is that their contributions were pivotal, taking the ancient concept of timekeeping and turning it into something more dynamic. Time was no longer just a passive observer. It was now something that actively engaged with the lives of those who sought to master it. You lean against a cool stone column, watching the intricate movements of the water clock, the wheels spinning ever so slightly, the faint sound of water escaping into the air. For the first time, time feels alive. It's more than a simple measuring device. It's a part of the world around you, shaping and defining everything it touches. And somewhere in the background, you can hear the distant hum of a water organ, adding its haunting melody to the atmosphere. A reminder that in the world of the Greeks, time was a symphony. And as much as we romanticize those quiet, dripping hours, you can't help but wonder, how many times has your modern alarm just been that? A jarring noise, disconnected from anything grander? Imagine if your alarm clock had the elegance of ancient water-powered machines. Maybe we'd be more inclined to rise with the sun rather than just stumble into it, bleary-eyed, groaning about the snooze button. The air cools as you slip through the long corridors of a medieval monastery. The rhythmic murmur of chanting monks fills the air, and a flicker of candlelight dances against stone walls. Above you, the moon moves slowly across the heavens, and the scent of incense drifts gently through the high windows. But while all seems serene, there's a quiet urgency behind the peace. The monks have a schedule, and their lives are measured not by digital clocks, but by the steady passage of water. As we move through time, we now find ourselves in medieval Europe, a world where water clocks took on a slightly different role. The monks, with their structured lives and devotion to routine, found themselves in need of precise timekeeping for prayers, masses, and other religious duties. Water clocks, like those that had drifted west from the classical civilizations, began to make their way into the religious centers of Europe, albeit in a more functional rather than ornamental form. These devices were not meant to decorate a grand temple. Instead, they served as critical tools for regulating the daily monastic life. In the early medieval period, many monasteries operated under the rule of Saint Benedict, which outlined an intricate schedule of prayers, meals, and work. The monk's day was divided into hours, with fixed times for waking, praying, eating, and resting. For this highly organized routine, the traditional methods of timekeeping, sundials, and simple clocks were not sufficient. Water clocks filled the gap, but these were no luxury items. Water clocks in monasteries were far more utilitarian. Monks would often use them to time the intervals between prayers or mark the beginning and end of religious rituals. They were not ornamental creations for royalty or scholars. They were the workaday instruments of piety. One of the most interesting aspects of these clocks was their simplicity. Unlike the complex gear systems developed by the Greeks, medieval water clocks often relied on just a single mechanism, a slow drip of water that steadily filled a container, often with a float that rose and triggered a bell or a signal to alert the monks. In some ways, the water clocks of medieval monasteries were the opposite of the elaborate mechanical clocks of the later Middle Ages, where the grand clocks of the cathedral towers in Europe were elaborate and intricate. These humble devices were designed with one purpose in mind: to regulate the time of prayer. In a monastery, every minute mattered because the monks' lives revolved around the fixed hours of worship. It wasn't about being punctual for a business meeting or a banquet. It was about maintaining an unbroken connection to the divine. A mainstream historical tidbit here. One of the first recorded uses of water clocks in medieval Europe dates back to the 8th century. Charlemagne, the Holy Roman Emperor, is believed to have used water clocks to help standardize timekeeping across his vast empire, ensuring that all the monasteries adhered to the same schedule. This was no small task, as Charlemagne's empire spanned much of Western Europe. Standardizing time across such a diverse and fragmented region required a remarkable level of organization and coordination. exactly what the water clock provided. But there was another, perhaps lesser known, reason why water clocks were favored by the medieval church. They were silent. Unlike the bells of a traditional clock, which could interrupt the tranquility of prayer or disturb the peace of a cloister, the soft trickling of water was almost soothing, a whispering reminder that time was passing. It was as if the clock were marking the sacred rhythm of nature itself, rather than imposing human-made noise on a peaceful, contemplative setting. Here's a quirky tidbit that's sure to make you smile. In some monasteries, the water clocks were designed with a unique twist. Literally, the float that rose to mark the time was often attached to a small figure, which, upon reaching a certain height, would swing out and ring a bell or trigger a mechanical arm. In one case, a clock in the Abbey of St. Gall in Switzerland featured a figure of a monk that swung out of a compartment to announce the hour. The image of a monk swinging into action was probably a more charming start to the day than the cold chime of a bell. Still, water clocks were not perfect. Like all devices, they had their quirks. The water's flow could be influenced by the temperature, which meant that a clock might not work exactly the same from season to season. Monks had to be savvy about maintaining their clocks, adjusting for changes in the ambient temperature, and ensuring that the water's level was just right. In many cases, they relied on a series of small modifications, such as adjusting the size of the holes in the vessels or the weight of the float to fine-tune their timekeeping. But despite their imperfections, water clocks played an essential role in the lives of these monks. And when you stop to think about it, there's something particularly calming about the idea of measuring time with water, a symbol of life itself. In the stillness of the monastery, the passing of time wasn't marked by loud ticking or clanging. Instead, it was a gentle, rhythmic flow, one drop at a time. Historians still argue whether the medieval church relied more on water clocks or mechanical clocks. Some suggest that these water-based devices were often used as a backup or a complement to the larger, more complex mechanical clocks that began to emerge in the later Middle Ages. Others believe that for a long time, water clocks were the primary timekeeping device in monasteries, especially before the advent of large public clocks in town squares. As you wander deeper into the monastery, you hear the soft gurgle of water in a hidden room, where a monk dutifully watches over the flow, ensuring that the hours pass as they should. It's a quiet reminder that in a world of uncertainty, where the future is always unclear, the steady drip of water offers a sense of calm. Time here is not something to conquer. It is simply something to flow with. The night grows deeper, and the air turns thick with the scent of incense and mystery as you slip through the dense shadows of ancient China. You're standing on the edge of a bustling market, its streets filled with the faint hum of traders, scholars, and emperors alike. Lanterns flicker in the distance, casting their warm glow over scrolls and porcelain vases. But tonight, it's not the silk or tea that draws your attention. It's something else, something designed to control the very pulse of time itself. We've made our way into China, where water clocks would take on yet another fascinating form. The Chinese were no strangers to the passage of time, and they had been experimenting with different ways of measuring it for centuries. But when water clocks made their way into Chinese culture, they underwent a transformation. They became not only more intricate, but also beautifully symbolic. The Chinese version of the water clock, known as the clepsydra, was often a sophisticated and ornate contraption, reflecting the profound philosophical and spiritual understanding of the world that permeated Chinese society. Think of them as the ancient Chinese equivalent of an alarm clock, but with a lot more flair. These water clocks weren't simply tools for keeping time. They were works of art, sometimes crafted from bronze, jade, or even gold. The most notable feature of Chinese water clocks was their ability to measure time during the night. While the Egyptians and Greeks had certainly laid the groundwork for these devices, it was the Chinese who seemed to take water clocks to new heights of refinement. Ancient Chinese engineers incorporated multiple elements, from wheels and gears to floats and bells, in ways that were more complex and effective than earlier versions. One of the most famous water clocks from ancient China is the zhongguan, a device built during the Han Dynasty. The zhongguan wasn't just a simple water container. It was a carefully constructed instrument designed to keep track of the hours through a series of interconnected mechanisms. As water flowed into the clock, it triggered a set of gears and levers, moving small figurines or triggering chimes that signaled the passing of time. Imagine a golden dragon turning in the night, its scales shimmering as it marked the hour, time as a living, breathing thing. Here's a fun little tidbit. Some Chinese water clocks included musical components. Picture this. As the water filled a container, it would not only power the mechanical gears, but also strike a series of tuned metal bells. These bells, ranging in size and tone, produced a melody that varied depending on the time of day. It wasn't just a way of telling the time. It was a celebration of the passage of time, a harmonious blend of art, music, and engineering. A water clock in China could be as much an orchestra as it was a timepiece. Let's pause for a moment and talk about how these clocks fit into the broader cultural context of ancient China. The Chinese had a unique relationship with time. While in the West, time was often seen as something to be conquered, controlled, and quantified. In China, it was often viewed as something cyclical, flowing in harmony with nature. The use of water clocks was symbolic of this belief. Time wasn't a rigid, linear march toward an unknown future. It was a continuous, natural flow, like the rivers that crisscrossed the land. Here's where the mainstream historical fact enters the picture. During the Tang Dynasty, 618 to 907 CE, Chinese water clocks became so sophisticated that they were used in astronomical observations. These clocks helped astronomers accurately measure the passage of time, assisting them in charting the stars and mapping the night sky. It was not just about waking up for a meeting or a prayer. It was about understanding the universe itself. The precision of these clocks helped unlock the mysteries of the stars and laid the groundwork for later developments in Chinese astronomy. But, like all technological advancements, the use of water clocks didn't come without its challenges. For one, water clocks were prone to the same issues that plagued their predecessors. Changes in temperature could cause the water flow to speed up or slow down, throwing off the timekeeping. To solve this, the Chinese engineers incorporated various mechanisms to adjust the water's flow rate. But even the most sophisticated clocks still required a certain level of maintenance. The idea of setting a water clock was a delicate dance, requiring constant attention to ensure that the water flowed just right. And despite their beauty and engineering brilliance, water clocks in China, like everywhere else, eventually faded as mechanical clocks became more refined and widespread. But their influence remains. You can still find artifacts of ancient Chinese water clocks in museums around the world, and their legacy lives on in the delicate art of clockmaking that flourished in China long after the first clepsydras had gone silent. Historians still debate whether the Chinese were truly the innovators of the water clock, or whether their designs were influenced by the systems they encountered along trade routes. Given that China was a key point on the Silk Road, it's likely that ideas and technologies spread and mixed as merchants and scholars exchanged knowledge across cultures. The sophistication of Chinese water clocks suggests that, whether through independent discovery or cultural exchange, the Chinese took the water clock and made it their own. As you wander deeper into the marketplace, you can almost hear the faint sounds of the water clock's chimes in the distance. It's a soothing melody, ringing through the streets as time flows gently forward, marking not just the hours of the day, but the rhythm of life itself. The Chinese, with their love for balance and harmony, understood that time was a gift, and their water clocks reflected that. It's hard not to imagine that in some small way, we've lost something by abandoning these ancient methods. Today, our clocks are efficient, accurate, and often soul-crushing in their relentless beep, beep, beeps. But back then, time was a dance, gentle, melodic, and flowing, and somewhere across the distance of centuries, it still echoes. As the moon shifts across the sky, you feel a subtle shift in the air. The familiar rhythm of the night takes on a new layer as you travel farther east to the heart of the Islamic Golden Age. You stand in the bustling streets of Baghdad, a city brimming with scholars, traders, and dreamers under the golden dome of the House of Wisdom. The smell of spices and ink fills your nostrils as the night hums with quiet activity. But tonight, your journey brings you to an unexpected place. The remarkable water-powered timepieces that revolutionized the way the Islamic world understood the passage of time. In the Islamic world, where astronomy and science thrived, water clocks were not just practical tools for telling time. They were instruments of intellectual achievement and cultural pride. The early Islamic scientists and engineers didn't just inherit the knowledge of the Greeks and Romans. They took it further. They refined and expanded it, creating a new era of timekeeping that was as much about artistry as it was about precision. Water clocks in the Islamic world were often incredibly intricate. They were more than simple drip mechanisms. They featured elaborate systems of gears, weights, and floats that could not only measure the passing of time, but also signal it with mechanical displays. Imagine a water clock shaped like an intricate tower, with moving parts powered by the flow of water that could ring bells, release flags, or display figures in motion. These clocks were mechanical symphonies, blending art, science, and divine precision. Perhaps the most famous of these devices was the Al-Jazari water clock, created by the polymath Ismail al-Jazari in the 12th century. Al-Jazari was a mechanical engineer and inventor whose work bridged the worlds of timekeeping, hydraulics, and automata. His water clocks were sophisticated and groundbreaking, combining both water-powered mechanisms and complex mechanical displays. One of his creations, a large, ornate clock powered by water, featured a rotating drum that could show the time as well as move figures of animals and human-like automata. The clock would ring bells at regular intervals, reminding those nearby that time was passing. It wasn't just a tool, it was a performance. This creativity is not a small thing. In a time when the concept of time was often tied to religious observance, the ability to measure it with such elaborate, moving displays had cultural significance. These clocks were not simply markers of the mundane. They were reflections of divine order, where time itself became a manifestation of the will of God. The passing of hours was viewed as something sacred, and these beautifully crafted timepieces embodied that belief. But the sophistication of the Islamic water clocks didn't stop there. While their mechanical displays were impressive, the clepsydra systems that powered them were no less refined. Al-Jazari's clocks, for example, relied on a well-calibrated system of water reservoirs that, when filled, would power gears and move the clock hands. The precision required to keep the flow of water at a constant rate was extraordinary, and the engineering ingenuity displayed in these devices was a testament to the skill and intellect of the Islamic world. A mainstream historical fact here: Al-Jazari's works were revolutionary, not just in the context of timekeeping, but in mechanical engineering as a whole. His book, The Book of Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices, detailed his water clocks, and many of the principles he outlined would later influence the development of clocks in medieval Europe. His designs were a bridge between the ancient world and the Renaissance era, spreading across borders and shaping future developments. But here's a quirky tidbit. In some of Al-Jazari's clocks, he included a level of whimsical imagination that you wouldn't expect from a timekeeping device. In one of his water clocks, the time was indicated by the movement of a procession of figures, everything from elephants to kings riding camels, all powered by the slow and steady flow of water. It's as if time itself was marching on, embodied by figures who moved at the command of the clock. You could almost picture it as a grand parade, with each figure signaling another tick of time. And yet, despite their precision and beauty, water clocks in the Islamic world were far from perfect. As in all previous examples, water flow could be inconsistent due to temperature changes, evaporation, and other environmental factors. To solve this, Al-Jazari employed an array of techniques, such as creating airtight seals to prevent evaporation and using larger reservoirs that could hold more water. But even the best systems couldn't fully eliminate the issues caused by nature's unpredictability. Still, the fact that such devices were able to function as they did in an era without electricity or modern materials speaks to the brilliance of their creators. As you walk through the streets of Baghdad, you can almost hear the faint clinking of gears turning inside the walls of these ancient water clocks. The bells ring with a crisp, clean sound, echoing through the bustling city, marking the passing hours. It's easy to imagine the artisans and engineers of the time working in the shadows of the great mosques, perfecting their creations, not just for practical use, but as a way of bringing the divine order of the universe into the physical realm. Their clocks didn't just keep time, they embodied it. And while these clocks eventually gave way to the more mechanical, gear-driven clocks of the Renaissance, their legacy lives on. Many of the principles outlined by al-Jazari and other Islamic engineers would later influence the development of clocks in Europe, including those in cathedral towers and town squares. In some ways, Islamic water clocks were the spark that ignited the Renaissance obsession with timekeeping and mechanical innovation. Historians still debate whether these clocks were as widespread in the Islamic world as we like to think, or if they were limited to the elite circles of scholars and inventors. Regardless, what is undeniable is that the Islamic Golden Age's contributions to timekeeping, particularly the water clock, were a turning point in the history of horology. They represented a cultural and intellectual milestone that would shape the future of time, turning it from a mysterious, cyclical force into a measurable, mechanical certainty. As you stand there in the twilight of ancient Baghdad, you can almost hear the ticking of time itself, moving forward in rhythm with the gentle flow of water, reminding everyone who listens that the world is not just governed by chance, but by precision, ingenuity, and the pursuit of knowledge. The moonlight is softer now, the stars twinkling like delicate dots of silver across the night sky. You've traveled through centuries and civilizations, witnessing how water clocks slowly shaped the understanding of time. But now we enter a more heated debate, the tug of war between two rival technologies, water clocks and their fiery counterparts, the candle clocks. There's something almost poetic about this clash. On one side, the cool, flowing nature of water, and on the other, the crackling, consuming heat of fire. Both were used for the same purpose, to mark time. But which was the superior method? Historians still argue over this very question. But let's take a step back and enjoy the show. Candle clocks were, for lack of a better term, a more fiery innovation in the world of timekeeping. Essentially, they were candles designed to burn at a precise rate, with markings along their length that indicated the passage of time as the wax melted. While water clocks worked on the principle of liquid displacement, candle clocks relied on the steady consumption of a solid wax powered by the relentless force of fire. And while fire might seem like an unpredictable force, these candle clocks were often remarkably accurate, at least in the right conditions. The basic principle was deceptively simple. As the candle burned, it melted at a constant rate, allowing time to be measured in minutes or hours, depending on the size of the candle. Some candles had marks along their length, so you could literally see how much time had passed by how far the wax had melted. In some cases, the candles were designed to be placed in a special holder with a wick that would burn at an even pace. It was the simplicity and elegance of the system that appealed to many, and for centuries, candle clocks served as a reliable method of keeping time in the homes of the wealthy, as well as in monasteries and other institutions. But the story of candle clocks is far from one-sided. They certainly had their advantages, but they weren't without their flaws. Unlike water clocks, which were more predictable and stable, candle clocks were sensitive to environmental factors like humidity, temperature, and even the quality of the wax. If the candle wasn't made with high-quality wax, it could burn unevenly, making the entire system less reliable. And while the candle might give you the satisfaction of watching time literally melt away before your eyes, you couldn't really see how much time was left until the candle had burned down enough to reveal its next marking. It was an anxiety-inducing way to measure time, especially when you were racing against the clock, or in this case, the flame. But here's where things get even more interesting. As historians have dug into the timeline of water clocks versus candle clocks, there's been an ongoing debate about which was more efficient. While both technologies emerged independently across different cultures, some scholars suggest that candle clocks were actually better suited to the domestic sphere. They didn't require the large, elaborate water systems that water clocks did, and they could be used indoors, even in rooms without running water. All you needed was a good candle, a holder, and a bit of patience. In fact, candle clocks were used extensively in European households during the medieval and Renaissance periods, where they were relied upon for everyday timekeeping. A quirky tidbit about these early candles. In some instances, a candle clock would have a hidden feature that would only reveal itself at the end of the candle's burn time. Some of these candles were designed with a small wax seal or a figure hidden inside, which would melt out or become visible when the time was up. Imagine time literally unlocking a surprise at the end of its passage. It's a bit like the adult version of an advent calendar, but for grown-ups who wanted to mark the hours with a touch of mystery. On the other hand, water clocks had their own set of challenges. For one, water clocks weren't always as portable or versatile as candle clocks. They required a steady flow of water, which was often not available indoors or in smaller spaces. They were also more sensitive to external factors like evaporation, temperature fluctuations, and pressure changes. If your water clock wasn't carefully calibrated or maintained, the accuracy would suffer. But perhaps more critically, the water clock was never quite as instant as the candle clock. With a candle clock, you could see the progress as the wax melted. Water clocks, on the other hand, often relied on floats or markers that didn't provide that same immediate visual feedback. That subtle difference may seem small, but it played a role in how people interacted with their timepieces. And so, we find ourselves at a crossroads where the rivalry between these two timekeeping technologies, water clocks and candle clocks, continues to spark debate. Some historians argue that the water clock, with its precision and reliability, was ultimately the better choice for large-scale or ceremonial timekeeping, such as in temples or astronomical observatories. Others point to the candle clock's elegance and portability as reasons for its popularity among everyday people. Fire versus water. A clash of two elements, both capable of marking the passage of time in their own unique ways. There's still a lingering debate today, an ongoing conversation about the effectiveness of these two technologies. Some argue that water clocks, being more predictable, were superior for religious and scholarly purposes, while candle clocks were better suited to home life and practical use. Historians still argue whether one ever completely displaced the other. While the water clock may have been more scientifically advanced, the simplicity of the candle clock had its own charm. You stand on the edge of this debate, watching as time continues to flow. Whether it's through the steady drip of water or the soft flicker of flame, whichever method you prefer, the argument remains a reminder that our understanding of time has always been influenced by the tools we've had at our disposal. Fire, water, both are powerful forces, and both have left their mark on the way we measure the passage of time. The wind carries with it the familiar scent of salt water, and as the sun begins to rise over the horizon, you're standing at the edge of the Great Silk Road. The hustle and bustle of merchants, travelers, and scholars fills the air. People move back and forth, their lives crisscrossing like the paths of the very trade routes that connect the East to the West. It's here, in this exchange of goods, ideas, and knowledge, that we see the true power of the water clock. Its ability to move across cultures and borders, leaving behind ripples that would shape the future of timekeeping for centuries to come. The Silk Road wasn't just a network for the movement of silk, spices, or precious metals. It was a conduit for ideas. And just as knowledge of paper, printing, and gunpowder traveled from China to the West, so too did the technology of the water clock. From the bustling markets of the Tang Dynasty to the great intellectual centers of the Middle East and beyond, the humble water clock began to make its way across borders, gathering new elements along the way and evolving in the process. By the time the water clock made its way into the Islamic world, its basic design had already been refined by the Greeks and Chinese, but it was in the Middle East, particularly in cities like Baghdad, Damascus, and Cordoba, that the water clock became more than just a tool for telling time. Here, it was transformed into a piece of art, an intellectual marvel and a symbol of scientific progress. Scholars in these cities didn't just use the water clock to mark the hours. They used it to push the boundaries of engineering and mathematics, creating clocks with multiple moving parts, automata, and mechanical displays. The Islamic world didn't just inherit these devices, it revolutionized them. But the water clock didn't stop there. As the Islamic empires expanded, the clock's influence began to spread further west, eventually making its way into Europe. When we talk about the Renaissance, an era defined by rebirth, rediscovery, and reinvention, the water clock played a key role. The great engineers and scientists of the period looked to the Islamic world for inspiration, bringing with them the sophisticated technology of the water clock. It was during this time that the true marriage of science and art began, as Renaissance clockmakers sought to perfect the designs they had inherited. Now, this wasn't just a one-way flow of knowledge. The exchange of ideas wasn't solely confined to the east-west direction. European inventors and scholars, already familiar with the water clock through the Islamic world, began developing their own versions of these timepieces. And while the water clock's primary purpose had been to keep time in religious settings, the Renaissance period saw it take on a new role. Public clocks for town squares, private clocks for homes, and even clocks that could be used to mark the beginning and end of scientific experiments. But the true beauty of the water clock's journey is how it remained a symbol of the blending of cultures. From the high-domed mosques of Baghdad to the cobblestone streets of Florence, the water clock was a silent witness to the great intellectual exchanges of its time. Historians still argue over who had the first true clock. Was it the Chinese, the Greeks, or the Islamic inventors? What's clear, however, is that the water clock was never confined to one place or time. It moved across continents, influencing every society it touched, evolving and adapting to fit the needs of those who encountered it. A quirky tidbit here. One of the most famous water clocks to make the journey along the Silk Road was a clock built in China during the Tang Dynasty. It was said to be so large and intricate that it could not only tell time, but also predict the weather. Using a series of water-powered mechanical instruments that displayed changes in atmospheric pressure. Imagine that, a timepiece that could also act as an early weather station, powered by the same principles that govern the passage of hours. As the centuries passed and the water clock moved through different hands, different cultures, and different eras, it began to lose its original form. By the time it reached medieval Europe, the elegant, liquid-powered devices were replaced by more mechanical clocks. These clocks, powered by gears and weights, were more efficient for the needs of an expanding society that required precision for industry, trade, and navigation. Still, the influence of the water clock never fully disappeared. Even as mechanical clocks took over, the fundamental principles of the water clock, the reliance on fluid dynamics, the careful calibration of systems, and the integration of art and science, shape the evolution of modern timekeeping. The design of the water clock became the foundation for the clocks that powered the great cathedrals of Europe, where intricate timepieces marked the passing of the hours for all to hear. Historians still argue whether the water clock ever fully reached its potential as an international timekeeping device. Some believe it could have been further refined, spreading its influence across even more cultures. Others suggest that its time had come and gone, overtaken by the efficiency and precision of mechanical clocks. But there's one thing no one can dispute. The journey of the water clock across the world left an indelible mark on the history of time. You pause for a moment, watching the bustling marketplace, the hum of activity, the constant motion of people and goods. The water clock has long since been replaced by more modern devices, yet the legacy of those early innovations continues to echo through time. The people here are living proof of the Silk Road's power, an exchange of knowledge, culture, and ideas that transcended borders, just as the water clock once did. The steady drip of water, marking the moments of the day, seems almost like a whisper of the past, reminding us that time, in its endless flow, connects us all. The air is cooler now, the dimming light casting long shadows across the horizon as you stand in the heart of a bustling medieval town. The sound of horse-drawn carts clattering over cobblestones fills your ears. It's here, in this crossroads of history, that the story of the water clock begins to slowly fade into the background. The era of mechanical clocks has arrived, reliable, precise, and ever so eager to push aside their liquid predecessors. Water clocks, once marvels of engineering and elegance, are now relegated to the shadows of history. The rise of gears, weights, and springs will forever change the way we mark the passing of time. The transition from water clocks to mechanical clocks wasn't immediate, nor was it entirely smooth. In the early medieval period, water clocks were still in use in various parts of the world, particularly in religious settings like monasteries, where they were integral to the daily rhythm of prayer. However, as technology advanced, the limitations of water clocks began to show. The need for constant water flow and careful calibration was cumbersome, and the precision offered by mechanical systems, powered by gears and weights, eventually won out. Mechanical clocks, first developed in Europe during the 13th century, relied on the regular motion of gears and weights to measure time. Unlike water clocks, which were affected by factors such as evaporation and temperature, mechanical clocks were more stable and could be placed indoors, unaffected by the elements. The introduction of the escapement mechanism, a device that allowed a clock to measure time in uniform intervals, was revolutionary. Suddenly, timekeeping was no longer bound to the fluctuations of nature. It could be controlled and manipulated with unprecedented accuracy. Yet the water clock was never fully forgotten. It lingered in the corners of society, still used for ceremonial purposes in certain religious institutions, and as a cultural symbol of the ancient world. In fact, some of the most intricate mechanical clocks built in Europe during the Renaissance were inspired by the designs of earlier water clocks. The elegant, flowing lines of water-powered timepieces became the basis for ornate, moving automata in later mechanical clocks. The clockmakers of the Renaissance, known for their creativity and artistry, incorporated elements of both the mechanical and the liquid worlds into their designs, producing works of both engineering and beauty. One fascinating tidbit from this period. During the 16th century, a group of clockmakers in Florence created a water clock that featured an automaton, a mechanical figure that would move each time the clock struck the hour. This clock, which was placed in the Medici Palace, used both water and mechanical mechanisms, blending the old with the new in a beautiful homage to the past. Imagine the sight of a water-powered figure moving in sync with the passing of time, a clear indication that even in the face of innovation, the legacy of the water clock still had a place. But despite these lingering echoes, water clocks were gradually phased out. The demands of an increasingly industrialized world, where precision and efficiency were paramount, made the mechanical clock the preferred option. Town clocks, the great timekeepers of medieval cities, were now driven by the unstoppable force of gears and springs, with mechanical systems that could accurately measure hours, minutes, and seconds. The mechanical clock had arrived in full force, and the water clock was no longer the symbol of scientific progress. Historians still argue whether the transition from water clocks to mechanical clocks was inevitable, or whether it could have been delayed by further advancements in hydraulic technology. Some suggest that water clocks could have continued to evolve with improvements in their design, materials, and accuracy. Others point to the inevitability of the mechanical clock's rise, driven by the needs of a rapidly changing world that demanded greater precision and reliability. What's clear, however, is that water clocks never truly disappeared. Their influence can be seen in the clocks that followed, and their legacy continues to inform the way we think about timekeeping today. Even the mechanical clocks that came to dominate the medieval and Renaissance worlds were, in many ways, a product of the same intellectual curiosity that had driven earlier civilizations to experiment with water, gravity, and other natural forces. In some remote corners of the world, the water clock quietly lived on, maintained by those who remembered its beauty and elegance. In Asia, the tradition of water clocks continued in certain regions long after mechanical clocks had taken over the West. Water clocks even made brief comebacks in certain artistic and ceremonial settings, where their fluid motion and soothing sounds offered a stark contrast to the harsh, precise ticking of mechanical timepieces. As you stand in the fading light of the medieval town, watching the last vestiges of the water clock slip away into the past, you realize that time itself is a fluid concept. Just as the water clock once flowed steadily with the passage of hours, so too does our understanding of time evolve with the tide of history. The mechanical clock may now dominate, but it was built on the foundations laid by those early pioneers who used water to mark the passing of time. The delicate balance of art and science that define the water clock lives on in every tick of the modern clock. And yet, there's something poetic in the way the water clock faded from history. It wasn't a sudden revolution. It was a quiet transition as society slowly turned its gaze away from the gentle flow of water to the precise, mechanical ticking of the future. Perhaps in that quiet fade lies a lesson for us all, a reminder that the passage of time is not something to be controlled, but something to be experienced. In the end, whether we measure time with the drip of water or the tick of a clock, it continues to move forward, relentlessly and without pause.